Hi, thanks for having me back. So I do have an update. Unfortunately, they're right. I don't usually get to provide great news. Every once in a while I do, but probably not today. Do I just click this and it'll come on? There we go. Maybe. So when I was here a few years ago, we were just starting this project. So I'm happy to report that we did complete it, and it was successful. When I was here, this is a very researchy topic, studying land subsidence using spaceborne radar. And we've done that in a lot of areas, but the land disturbances that go along with agricultural land practices made it particularly challenging in the Central Valley. But after a lot of sleepless nights and other worries, we got it done. And we're also finishing, so this is sort of part one of the project. We're working to publish part two, which is more focused along the California aqueducts south of this area. So this present study, we really focused on the Delta-Mendota Canal. We worked in cooperation with Bureau of Reclamation, and I'll give you sort of the highlights first. So essentially, we were surprised to find about 1,200 square miles of land affected by subsidence over a 2-year period. Rates of subsidence ranged anywhere from about a ½ inch a year, and that was along the Delta-Mendota Canal. That was our focus. But northeast of that canal, we found an area that's subsiding at about a foot a year since 2008. And we know from reclamation and DWR surveys that those rates have continued through 2013. So we know that at least 5 feet have happened since 2008. And this is adversely affecting infrastructure. The Delta-Mendota Canal, fortunately, is on the edge of this subsidence bowl, but in the middle of it are the Eastside Bypass, which is a critical flood control channel, and also the San Joaquin River, and it happens to be where the San Joaquin River restoration work is going on. It's also affecting parts of the California aqueduct and many other local canals. There's canals snake through this area. This subsidence is permanent, and the subsidence occurred when groundwater levels declined. And they declined to historically low levels, meaning levels that they had never been before. They're lower now than they ever have been since we started keeping records. The area of maximum subsidence is about 25 miles northeast of where it was historically. We did not expect to find subsidence where we did. That was a big surprise. Where it was located, how big it was, and how fast it was subsiding. All of those were unexpected results from this study. And really, people ask me, I've been in the press a lot, people ask, well, what about, Hetch Hetchy, or what about this area, what about that area? And I have to tell them I don't know, because we haven't looked. I didn't expect this either. So there's a lot more work to be done. So we care about subsidence because it does damage infrastructure. It damages really any infrastructure that crosses these areas because it's not all subsiding the same. It's subsiding differentially. The most sensitive infrastructure are canals because they are built on tiny little gradients. So they are built with very specific elevations, and the whole canal works together, meaning every point upstream has to be higher in elevation than every point downstream. And if you start messing one of those up in the middle, then you have to adjust the entire system to compensate for that. If you don't, you get lost conveyance capacity, you get lost freeboard, which is the distance between the water surface and anything that crosses it, like a bridge, for instance. You get panel and the water surface misaligned, meaning sometimes the water will go over the top of the panel, start eroding behind the panel, and that's bad for levees. But also roads Railways, we see that the high-speed rail alignment are in horrible locations for subsidence. At this time, the last time I saw them, they were going right through this area of about a foot a year. So it's going to damage pipelines, anything that crosses these areas. It also damages natural resources. And the one that's coined often is this loss of storage capacity. So once a aquifer compacts permanently, we can't store as much water as we used to. And there's a little graph on the board that kind of shows how that works. When clay is laid down, and clay is the big player in subsidence, it's laid down in random orientations, and it's a platy mineral. It's like a pancake. Think about it like that. And there's lots of space between the pancakes, lots of space. But when you lower groundwater levels to historically low levels, these units actually rearrange themselves, and these pancakes become more like stacks of pancakes. And you can fit a whole lot less water in between the pancakes. And they'll never go back to random orientation. You could also imagine as you differentially lower the land surface, things like rivers may change course, pools may form where we never had them before. So riparian problems as well, new wetland areas, that sort of thing. So historically, there was a lot of subsidence south of the Delta-Mendota Canal, along where now is the California Aqueduct. And the subsidence was actually discovered because the Delta-Mendota Canal started transmitting water in the early 50s, and almost immediately they noticed problems with the canal. And it was because of those findings that they said, keep the California Aqueduct closer to the coast ranges. Where it comes out into the valley, we have problems. So when the California Aqueduct was completed, started transmitting water in the early 70s, then not as much groundwater pumping was necessary because farmers could get water out of the canal. Water levels came up, and subsidence was essentially arrested. So it was only during droughts that we saw subsidence in this area again after 1970. So during 76, 77, 87 to 92, 2007 to 9, and more recently also. So the aqueduct essentially fixed the problem. That's a location of that data, so you can see it south of the Delta-Mendota Canal. The area I'm talking about now is shown by this red circle. So where the Delta-Mendota Canal was previously affected by subsidence to the south, it's now being affected by subsidence to the northeast. And I'll show you a time series of data that are in this new area of subsidence. It's kind of on the edge. We don't have any continuous monitoring right in this area. But what we found that and the whole study was initiated because of this last drought. There was concern of subsidence that was occurring because there would be more reliance on groundwater resources. But as it turns out, while the area south of the Delta-Mendota Canal still seems to be only affected during droughts, this new area that is northeast of the Delta-Mendota Canal near a small community called El Nido is subsiding at the same rates, whether it's drought or whether it's a record year of water. So we didn't expect to find that either. The area that I'm talking about has many canals. So and this just shows a map of some of the canals that go through there. The Delta-Mendota Canal, the Aqueduct, Eastside Bypass, San Joaquin River, Chowchilla Bypass, those areas. So here's what we found when we were focused on the Delta-Mendota Canal, and as we were processing the satellite data, and these are the results of those data, we could see that we were on the edge of something. But our focus was on the Delta-Mendota Canal. We have limited resources. But it was about the same time that we got a call from Department of Water Resources saying, we're doing these leveling and GPS surveys, and can this be right? It looks like there's about a foot a year of subsidence. So we processed another interferogram, the satellite data, and confirmed not only that, yeah, we were seeing a foot a year of subsidence, but also that it was huge, and it was going from I-5 to 99, from Merced on the north to Mendota on the south, a much larger area than we had suspected. That was subsiding at about, the smaller areas about a foot a year, towards the edges more like a half an inch a year. I'll show you a close-up of this data. It's just contoured, so you don't have to worry about the colors. It's in inches. And now I want to show you a cross-section that we made using this data along the east side bypass, so you can see what the elevation changes look like along the bypass. And that's what they look like. There's a huge hole in the middle. So now, when water is flowing out, remember this is a flood control channel, it's going to have to fill up that hole first, and all of the elevations lower than the next segment downstream. So that is going to exacerbate flooding in this area and diminish the capacity of the east side bypass to move water out. And the reason for this is, like I mentioned, there's historically low groundwater levels. So people have been pumping, and there are reasons for this. We have found that there's been a conversion from row crops to permanent crops, and there's also been a conversion from rangeland to permanent crops. So that's areas that have never been irrigated before. Much of these conversions are happening by very large companies, not the farmers that have been there for a very long time. So this is just a schematic of the aquifer system. There's two systems. There's a shallow system and a deep system, and they're separated by this very thick confining layer. And I just wanted to show you a couple of graphs of groundwater levels. And we can see that in the shallow system, we're not quite at historical lows when this data was collected. This is in 2010. I suspect that situation has changed since then. But the deep system has absolutely hit historic lows, and they are continuing to decline. And this is just in this one area of the valley. There are stories like this all over the valley. GPS can give us a good indication about what's going on here. So these are continuous GPS stations run by somebody else, and the data are available online, and we use them for our hydrologic studies. And what we found is that there's different behaviors in these different GPS stations. The one near Los Banos, for instance, has a fairly steady rate of subsidence during drought and during wet years and during normal years, but the rate increases a bit during drought. South of there, near Mendota, we see that there's subsidence really only during droughts, that the rest of the time it's pretty flattened out. And then on the east side of the valley, near Madera, we see that there's a very fast rate of subsidence, and it also occurs during droughts, during non-droughts, and there's no real discernible rate change. So this is happening anyway. And all of these are on the very edge of the subsidence bowl. Of course, we don't have any monitoring right inside. It always turns out that way. So these tell us something about where these water supplies are coming from. The east side, near Madera, they don't have access to surface water, and that's why it doesn't matter if there's a drought situation and not enough water is coming down the canal. They don't have access to it anyway. So they pump essentially the same year after year. Whereas near Mendota, P304, that's near the Delta Mendota Canal, they get surface water deliveries. But when surface water deliveries are curtailed, they get subsidence because they have to pump more. And this is a map just showing the difference in where subsidence was and where it is now. I can go back and forth a little bit. We also know of another subsidence area that's in the south near Corcoran and Pixley. We're trying to find the funding to do the work down there. So this is a new area. Not that it never subsided before, but you could see it's on the edge, and now it's the center of subsidence. So what can we do about it? Well, scientifically, what we would say is that groundwater levels have to be above those historic lows. that is the trigger that causes subsidence. When water levels go below that level, then we have subsidence. If they stay above, we don't have subsidence. Okay, so and that's a matter of either reducing groundwater withdrawal or enhancing groundwater recharge. It's a water balance question. So, and what we really found is that because we need to know where historic lows are, historical data is really important so that we can put current data in context of historical data. Where are we now compared to where we have been? And that could be a way to gauge, do we have to worry about subsidence here or not? You know, where are our water levels in the context of the past? And that's really what we need to kind of, to track these conditions for any kind of decision support activities. So.
Great, thank you. I think we'll wait on questions until we've completed the presentations. So, Mary?